Alright. Mornin ramblins. The argument for the black powder revolver. First of all, cheers. So, in the modern era, why choose black powder revolvers? There's a plethora of different reasons. Some of them may surprise you. Some of them might make you question your own decisions. So, bear with me. This is going to be a long video. Like I said, it's ramblings. Now, first and foremost, why choose a black powder revolver over a modern firearm, even a modern revolver? Modern firearms certainly do have their perks. Interchangeability, certain degree of ease of reloading, I'll say. But there's less that you can do with a modern revolver than you can with a black powder revolver, and this is my own experience speaking here. You see, with modern revolver, you've got the cartridges that are loaded either by the manufacturer or your hand loads, and hand loads are difficult, possibly dangerous, and there's always that caveat that you're the one who has to load it. Nobody else is going to load it for you. And then there is manufactured loads, which there is only a selection of them. That selection will not change. That selection does not change because there's no demand for other. And this is where the black powder revolver shines in this respect. Safe handling. Okay, I'm going to remove the cylinder from my black powder gun, as it is a prop at this point. So, yes, I just did that without looking at it, by the by. That's how good you can get with it, with whatever weapon you're using. As you can see, it is empty. Okay. I want to point out something particular to a black powder revolver that doesn't show up on modern revolvers. That is this right here. You have your own little loading press. That loading press allows you to load all sorts of different shit. And because you don't have a cartridge that you're loading it into, it's actually rather a cylinder, like such. You can put any projectile that you wish to into the cylinder. That being said, black powder guns are low pressure guns, by the recollection of understanding what any cartridge is going to give you. Even black powder cartridges, they're going to give you higher pressures. But that's only higher pressure impulse selective to the cylinder, not necessarily selective to the entirety of the gun. So again, that's going to give you a different result. You can select a multitude of different projectiles. everything from snake shot all the way up to 300 grain in my particular, which is a 44 caliber, and chambered for the 4440 black powder. Okay, cap and ball. 40 grain charge with a 4.54 round ball. But you can go, per se, to 30 grains and a conical, or 25 grains, 28 grains of powder, and even up to and including jacketed hollow points. I've done it. It does work. Doesn't work great, but it works. And so you can, in fact, run defensive ammunition in a black powder gun. So the whole spiel of, well, you can't run hollow points in it is bullshit. You can, and I do. Black powder guns, oh, well, you can't run them at magnum velocities. Low magnums, yes, you can. And when I'm talking low magnums, I'm saying, okay, so 44 magnum high velocity would be 1,600, 1,800 feet per second. Low velocity would be 11 to 1,200 feet per second. Just for reference, a magnum loading of black powder in, say, a Dragoon, 60 grains of black powder, or 50 grains of black powder for that matter, depending on your Dragoon, and say a 200 grain conical or a 250 grain conical, and a 44 caliber is running about the same velocity as a slow speed magnum or a high speed special. Okay, so when you're talking modern firearms, your cartridges are going to be, if you're talking 44 special, then you're talking the absolute top end, which is about 1,000 feet per second to maybe 1,100. Maybe. That's with the 44 special. 44 Magnum would be lowest end 44 Magnum. You're talking 1,000 feet per second up to about 1,200, 1,300 feet per second. Be about the same speeds, bullet speeds anyways. Not the same pressure rating, remember. Different driving gases. So when you're talking different driving gases, you can get better impulse out of black powder than you can out of nitrocellulose. Shocker, I know. But it really comes down to the physics of the actual projectile and firearm and temperature, pressure, this, that, and the other, all that, all the fun stuff. Anyways, the reason why I can jump to these kinds of conclusions is specifically having to deal with the pressures and bullet speeds between the two types of powder. And this has been proven out by several people I consider colleagues, I guess, on YouTube. Everything Black Powder has done a lot of different videos and development with smokeless inside of a cap and ball revolver. And pretty much proved out that higher pressure doesn't always mean faster bullet speed. just to point that out. Higher pressure does not always mean faster bullet speed. For instance, black powder runs normally between 2,300 and 2,800 pounds per square inch pressures. That's about the same as a PCP air gun. Okay. Top end PCP air gun. About the same pressures. Top end PCP air guns get between 700 and 1,400 feet per second out of their projectiles. Black powder guns, in their operating range, normally get between 650, and I'm talking, short barrel revolvers versus a full-size rifle, mind you. This is the difference here. Full-size air rifle, black powder revolver with an 8-inch barrel. So between 650 and 1,100 feet per second. And that's your margin of bullet speed with that black powder revolver. Same caliber as the large air rifle. It has to do with impulse. What energy is being related to that bullet through its travel down the barrel. Now, air at the same pressures is delivering a different impulse to that projectile. It's arriving at the same speed, but it traveled to that speed over more time. This creates a more recoil impulse as well. I don't know if you knew that. It's a different felt recoil. It's a more felt recoil, but at the same time, it's more manageable, which is why people recognize it less. And I'll get to that in a little while. But, this is more to do with black powder versus modern firearm than black powder versus air guns. This is just to give you an understanding of why, black powder and air guns are kind of in the similar ballpark. Kind of, not quite. And again, it comes down to impulse, which, like I was saying, translates directly with nitrocellulose powders, because nitrocellulose powders create a different impulse. Okay? Yes, it's a much higher pressure in that particular driving gas that's pushing that projectile. However, the energy relation of the driving gas to the projectile is, I want to say, more inhibited. And I've noticed this through experimentation with my air guns, funny enough. This is actually what brought me to this understanding about the differences between black powder driving gases and nitrocellulose driving gases. And that is particulate left over, what most people would call fouling. This is why airgun powder is an interesting substance and works so well. And it's also why you can never use black powder in an air gun powder in a black powder gun, or any of those two in a nitro gun, or nitro in a black powder gun. The driving gases are different, okay? And the impulse relation is different. So, projectile here. Let's say that the gases behind the projectile is just air. So that air pushing on your projectile is relating energy at the rate that the gas particles are impacting the back of the projectile. Okay. Now, it's also due to the mass of the particles impacting the back of the projectile. Gas particles, especially gas particles like dry air, are extremely light. And so each particle, even though it's moving really, really, really fast, is impacting the back end of this with only a tiny little bit of energy. And that tiny little bit of energy is getting imparted. And each one gives it a little bit more of a push and a little bit more of a push down the barrel. And this is the same with both air guns and black powder guns and nitro guns. Okay. However, this is where the physics changes. When you have a larger particle, it has more mass. And that larger particle with more mass is moving at, or maybe a little bit faster than, the other gas particle that we were just talking about. It imparts more energy, which creates a greater impulse. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Okay. Now, for those of you who think that nitrocellulose, well, it's going to create greater impulse as well. Yes, greater than an air gun. Not greater than black powder, because the particle size left over after the burn is smaller. You have more nitrogen available. You have less carbon available and very little sulfur. And so what ends up happening is that your particle size is smaller, even though you're at much higher pressures. And so you're moving those particles much faster. Your particle size is smaller. And that smaller particle size is imparting that energy at a lesser rate. So it takes more of those particles to move that projectile at the same speeds. Ergo, you've got a higher pressure that doesn't relate exactly to a higher velocity. The higher velocity comes from the larger particles impacting the back of the projectile. To that end, the pressure of air guns and black powder guns are pretty relatively similar. You know, black powder guns can get a little higher pressure, just a little bit. But those larger particles hitting the back of that projectile in the barrel and imparting more energy means that it's going to reach its velocity faster. Okay? So you don't need such high pressures from the black powder to get the same velocities as you would from the nitrocellulose, because the nitrocellulose particles are smaller than the black powder particles hitting the back end of the projectile. Now that we've gotten past that convoluted crap of physics, we get into the legalese of it. I know, about a half a dozen of you just went, nope, I'm done. All right, now that those people are gone, you don't have to go through a background check. It's sent right to your house. You're getting what you paid for. Guaranteed. It's made of metal. It's not made of plastic. You're not afraid there's going to be a flaw in the plastic or something and it's going to come apart on you. It's made of metal. It's been proofed at the factory. It's going to come to you and it's going to work. And it's going to come to your house. You don't have to go out in public to go get this. So, legally speaking, higher accessibility, less danger to your neighbors because of what you're putting together, It's actually less dangerous to your neighbors, funny as it may seem. Nitrocellulose explosions showed in the past that, and this is talking about nitrocellulose films, by the way, not even talking about nitrocellulose gunpowder. But nitrocellulose stockpiles in the past have shown that because of those greater pressures, you can create greater blast areas. That doesn't necessarily translate to better bullet performance. It just translates to greater blast area. So, again, pressure versus driving gas. Big deal. But digressing backwards is not what we're doing with this. When it comes down to the legal part of it, being able to make your own primers, it's actually legal for you to do this, by the way. You can make your own primer compound as long as you have it put into primers pretty much immediately. Storing it is really difficult, dangerous, and can cause issues, which is why there is particular laws in place for storage of primer compounds. All right. Not allowed to store over a certain amount. Whatever. Anyways. Making black powder. You're allowed to have, federally speaking, up to 50 pounds of black powder in your possession, in your own home, and none need be the wiser. Lead. Everybody knows you can buy lead off the free. You can pretty much get lead free if you walk. So that's not even an issue. You can make your own projectiles if you want. I mean, I do. I make my own defensive measure projectiles for bear areas. But again, it comes down to predominantly there are no hoops. And I thank God for that, because it's a situation of this is the way that the Second Amendment is supposed to be actually practiced. This is the way that you're supposed to go to it. Yes, there's a level of responsibility, but that responsibility is more on the person individual than that is on any company or, on the people selling the arms. It should never be a situation where there's anybody between the person who is selling the firearm and the person who's purchasing the firearm. There should never be anyone there. That is a violation of the Second Amendment in blatant definition. By reading the Second Amendment, a 3-year-old can turn around and say, that's illegal. The government should not be involved in my firearms purchase. Doesn't matter if it's local, if it's freaking state, if it's federal, it does not fucking matter. They should not be involved in my firearms purchase. They should not be involved in my ammunition purchase. They should not be involved in telling me where I may or may not be able to carry. They should definitely be allowed to stop people from committing outright murder. Go ahead. It's already illegal, and it should be illegal. Outright murder is wrong. Hello, come in Berlin. That doesn't mean that we need to stop people who are just trying to protect themselves from harm not be able to purchase a firearm, even a modern firearm. So this is, again, This is the argument for black powder guns. There is nobody in between you and your purchase. There is nobody between you and the dealer. You are purchasing the firearm, but it's an antique firearm, okay, but you're purchasing the firearm, and it is coming to you. There's nobody in between you. There's nobody saying, oh, no, you can't do that. Oh, no, wait. We just got to check real quick. Because reality of it is not everybody gets the option of saying, oh, well, sorry, Mr. Bad Guy, please come back when I can actually protect myself. Or please come back when the police get here. Now, I know I just rubbed a whole bunch of people the wrong way, but guess what? When the police are only minutes away and seconds count, reality doesn't give a shit about your political whimsy. Physics doesn't fucking care whether or not it's an air gun or a black powder gun or a freaking wrist rocket or a bow and arrow or a modern firearm or a damn rail gun. Physics only pays attention to the fact that it is a heavy projectile flying through the air. That's all that physics cares about. Biology only cares about that it's keeping the blood in and not the blood out. So, let's look at things obviously, logically, and legally. You can't get a modern firearm. Okay, well, you can get a black powder firearm. Guaranteed. Should you be having a black powder firearm if you have certain legal issues that are unresolved? No. That's just causing trouble for yourself. It's irresponsible, and it shows that you shouldn't have a firearm. Try and be responsible for yourself. Get through that problem. Get beyond whatever, probation, parole, whatever it is that is. Fix your legal issues. Create a proper legal status. Then go purchase a black powder gun. That way you don't have any issues, okay? But I'm just saying, the argument for black powder guns is much more substantial than the argument for modern firearms because of what they've done to the modern firearms. They have regulated them into oblivion and made it so that it is nearly impossible for you to be able to utilize a modern firearm for your own self-defense. Unless you are already grandfathered in owning your own modern firearms. Or, for that matter, you're willing to jump through a million different fucking hoops and have Uncle Sam sitting there with a microscope shoved so far up your ass he can actually sit there and count your cavities. Now, excuse me, but I have never liked government being that far up my backside. Ever. That is something that is atrocious, in my opinion. There should never be a situation where I have to ask, is it legal for me to do this in my own home? Is it legal for me to do this while I'm out and about? Is it legal? It shouldn't be a question of that. It should be, is it moral? And if it's not moral, then it's probably not legal. It should be that fucking simple. And I don't know why this is such a hard concept for people to understand. I have known this since I was a toddler. You see how I handle my equipment. I'm safe with it. I'm prepared for what may come. I also recognize life is not indefinite. You are going to die someday. Get with the program. Everything dies. This is life. Okay? We want to live as long as we possibly can. This is why you want to be able to defend yourself. Projectile weapons open up the space between you and the opponent who is trying to do you harm. This is the reason for a projectile weapon of any kind. Projectile weapon is a type of tool. Let's be clear. The true weapon is your brain. That is what you utilize in order to be an effective force. The tool that you are utilizing in order to extend that force is not reliant on the force itself. It's reliant on the distance between you and the individual causing you that issue or harm. Just for an instance here. Oh, I don't even have that I don't have it in my thing here. So we'll go with the small, because I've always got my small knife on me. As a prop. A knife. It's good close in. You know, it gives you that defensive capability of lethal force close in. It's not necessarily going to stop an attack. I'm going to be very clear. I've been stabbed. It did not stop me from tackling the dude off the front porch of the place. Okay? A stab wound is not going to stop an attacker. It definitely has lethal capabilities. Definitely. I was in a coma for 3 days. Maybe 2 weeks, I don't remember. That's how bad it was. I remember some things, and then some things I don't. And it's like just spaces of time gone. Knives scare the shit out of me. I'm actually not scared of guns. That big kapow, if I've heard it, I'm not scared of it. If I didn't hear it, now I'm worried. Because all I feel is pain and I didn't hear anything. That's a big deal. This is why knives scare the shit out of me. This is why getting shot actually does scare me. Am I afraid of it? There's no fear. There's no fear taking me down and stopping me, incapacitating me from doing it. There is the terror that it causes when you're injured. There is the terror that it causes after you've been injured and you realize that that is dangerous. But terror is not incapacitating. Terror is galvanizing. Instead of being so scared that it stops you, being afraid to the point where it stops you, terror is galvanizing. It causes you to do something, to make a decision, to make an effect on the situation. There's a difference here. This is the reason why I can confidently say, I'm not afraid. But just like in the movie Jumanji, I'm not afraid. I'm terrified. It's not the same thing. So, anyways, like I was saying, the argument for black powder guns. You can have black powder guns in places that you normally can't have modern firearms. You can use them for things that you can't normally use a modern firearm for. Like getting your dog's attention when he won't shut up. Knock it off! Right now! Apologies. As I was saying, the argument for black powder firearms is much larger than you would think. Now, what are the most common and ubiquitous black powder guns out there? Well, there's a lot of 38s. There's a lot of 32s. A lot of them. Because they were very popular at the turn of the century. And so, people know about them. There's a lot of them. People carried pocket revolvers. People carried, small 38 belt revolvers, and they were effective. They weren't greatly effective, but we got to remember the times. However, there was one gun in history at that same time that was considered to be a man stopper, and also was utilized by buffalo hunters, bear hunters, pig hunters, people who would go deer hunting, people would go facing off with wolves and stuff, going into the wilds and whatnot. Cowboys carried them because they would drop a freaking a cattle. They'd drop a stampeding cow. And this revolver cartridge is known as one of the most powerful cartridges at the turn of the century. It's known as the 45 Colt Long, or Long Colt. 45 in caliber, 4.52 ball or conical or hollow point, and 35 to 40. Yes, it could carry 40 grains capacity with the proper projectiles. Grains of black powder. Moving a projectile anywhere from 900 feet per second on up to 1,200 feet per second. This particular cartridge was based on the 44 cap and ball 40 grain charge made for, designed for specifically the Colt 1860 Army, and then copied by Remington, and I believe there was one other, but it wasn't Smith & Wesson. Smith & Wesson did their own. Winchester did one. It was 4440. And they also had a 4430. And just, again, this is all built off of the same originating cartridge, which is based off of the originating powder charge and projectile, which was 45 Colt. The 45 Colt with its proper powder charge. And when I say proper powder charge, I'm not talking about the 18 grain powder charge that was the substandard half-assed military munition that everybody got. I'm talking about the proper loading for the chamber for defensive and hunting purposes. 45 grains of black powder and either a 4.54 or 4.57 round ball. The capacity and capabilities of this cartridge were able to stop things as large as grizzly bears. Stop. Okay? Not just kill, but incapacitate at close range. At further ranges, of course, you would use something more akin to a rifle, larger bullet mass, further it can travel before that projectile loses its oomph. However, a round ball does actually act much like a hollow point does because of the fact that it's soft swage lead versus hollow points being some mixture of antimony and lead and tin sometimes. Or jackets or what have you. The round ball, being soft swage lead, will flatten out. It will impact, and the impact causes a direct impinging force opposing, which causes that rounded point of the ball to flatten out against what it's impacting against up into a point. And then it starts deflecting around, depending on what the substrate is you're hitting. We've all seen, the archaeology exhibits, hitting soil versus hitting a body versus hitting, like a horse carcass or something. We've seen the different archaeological bullets that have been pulled out of battlefields long past. So you understand, soft swage lead flattens out more. It relays more energy on target because that's what it does. Okay, it's just physics. This is why air guns and black powder guns are incredibly lethal. And everybody just passes them over because, it doesn't have a jacketed hollow point. Or it's not as fast. This is precisely why it was plenty for your great-great-granddad to go out there and go drop that, that 500-pound porker that was in the back 40. That could have chewed him up. All right. That's why it's definitely adequate enough to do that. That's a 500-pound hog, and yet at the same time, you're worried about it stopping a person. Let's completely forget about the fact that throughout the Old West, 38s were known for it. They were known for being able to do the job adequately enough. They weren't immediately incapacitating. This is the difference between the 44 horse pistol and the 38 belt pistol. The 38 belt pistol normally left guys groaning in agony and slowly succumbing. But a lot of guys lived. That was not the case with the 44. The 44 had a stopping power to it, if you will. I know that's a Fuddlore jargon, baby. Basically, Fuddlore jargon. We love that shit. No, I'm joking, by the way. It had more capacity to put more energy on target. That doesn't mean that it put all 214 pounds of energy on that target at the point of contact, which is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard about. It can knock a man out of its socks. No, jackass. It'll put a hole through the man because the man's made of squishy shit. The bullet's not. Regardless of how much that bullet might deform at high velocity, it's not squishy. It's very hard. Lead is actually really hard by comparison to human flesh. As a for instance, I did not deform that ball or that bullet at all, but I did deform my finger. This is what I'm saying. It doesn't matter that, your bullet's moving so much faster. It's putting more energy on the target, behind the target. Okay. Well, what about the target? This particularly is why in the 38 Special and the 357 Magnum, they had semi-jacketed hollow points. The best performance is done by soft lead. Regardless of whether it's got a hollow point or not, the best performing bullets are soft lead. Air guns have to have soft lead in order to perform appropriately. In order to perform, the lead has to be soft. This should be declarative to you as to why soft lead makes it so that black powder guns and air guns are every bit as deadly as modern firearms. Projectile technology. Because what is hitting the target? Is it the gun hitting the target? Are you throwing the gun at the target? In which case, why don't you just pick up a rock? You know, the rock's going to do more damage for less money. The projectile's what hits the target. You want to be paying attention to what you're throwing, not what's throwing it. This is why my .44 cap and ball revolver will outdo your 9mm with 6 shots versus your 18. This is why soft lead, moving roughly about the same speed, larger diameter. This is the difference, folks. This is why when people say, oh, well, you're cap and ball, you're going to get somebody killed. No, jackass, I'm going to actually save somebody's life. Because more often than not, at least today and age, 90% of firearms are in 1% of Americans' hands. You may not realize this, but it's actually the case. A lot of Americans out there that have firearms have a lot of them. For the vast majority of the rest of folks, they're either anti-gun, which I find absolutely fucking abhorrent. Get out of my country, you goddamn commie sob. And the others, they carry some other form of protection. Like me, for instance, air guns, black powder guns, there are the outliers, like, for instance, a few people that I know that only have the little freaking micro 9 pocket gun that they carry, and it's a chintzy little piece of shit. But when the chips are down, it's better to have something than not. Personally, if I'm carrying something that, semi-automatic, I want .45 ACP. I want something that's going to, doesn't matter if I'm shooting ball or if I'm shooting hollow point, I want it to thump. I've thought about the get off me guns. I've thought about the belly guns and whatnot, and the appeal for something like a mouse gun, that kind of left after I was a young man. Just because, well, of course, getting it, stabbed and shot and whatnot, I know the differences between a small projectile and a big projectile. I know the differences between a stab wound and a gun wound, a bullet wound, and what they do to a person. An air gun's gonna hurt. It's gonna fucking hurt bad. It might stop you. Might. It might give you something else to think about. but it's not going to be incapacitating like a 45 is going to be incapacitating. 45 is going to knock you down. It's going to put you on the ground because your body's not going to be able to process everything that's going on at that moment. It has nothing to do with the actual weight of the bullet. It has to do with where the bullet hit. And it has to do with the amount of bullet that hit and the amount of energy that's transferred from the bullet hitting. This is why a 9mm with a hollow point and plus P plus rounds will do okay and get the job done. This is why. Because of the energy on target and the amount of bullet hitting and where it is hitting in particular. But like I said before, this segue to my own personal experience real quick, a quick anecdote. Polymer guns flex when you fire them. It's not much, but a deflection of 1/2 degree over 50 yards is a lot. That can be up to a foot of difference. Folks don't realize this. This is why 50 yards is pretty much the maximum for any service pistol. Hello, come in Berlin, one of those, This is the reason why. Because modern firearms, even if they have an internal frame, flex. That semi-automatic, because the slide is such a heavier object, polymer is built to take up energy. It's built to contain the energy. It's not, it's built to transfer that energy. It's not built to really be rigid. Metal does that really well. Polymer doesn't. This is why a lot of polymer pistols have internal frames and whatnot, because they don't do it well. They do it, but they don't do it well. This is why I've never 3D printed my own gun. I think that polymer pistols are stupid. I've shot plenty of polymer pistols. I don't like them. I really don't like them. They flex too much in my hand. And that's because I'm not going to sit there and loose grip a pistol. I have too much experience with firing Magnum revolvers. You loose grip a pistol that has a double action trigger, and that motherfucker might come back like this. Excuse me, but I like to keep the top of my head firmly attached to my body. Thank you. So, no, I'm not going to be sitting there limp dicking it in the hand in order to keep my wrist from flexing BS. No. No, the gun should be operable. Not, I have to operate that gun in order to make it work for what it was intended to do. The only thing I should have to operate is the trigger. And if I have to operate anything else, it should be the action. That's it. I should not be having to operate the machine during the firing procedure in order to make it fire where I want it to fire at, because its flex variates so much. And remember, I've been through this. I've actually shot these guns. I'm not just sitting here talking out my neck. Polymer frames flex. It's not much, but at distance, it is enough. And when you start to compensate because of that flex, bullets start hitting the ground instead of hitting your target. If you ever notice the way that I set up my shot in my videos, you'll notice that I'm holding my hand out there. Either I'm, and by the way, don't teacup. I don't. If I'm going to teacup, that's underneath the pistol here. Okay. That's not here. And you can do it with a revolver. I do it all the time. I don't believe the bullshit hockey that everybody who's got a gun tuber channel actually puts out there. I test it. I actually test this shit. Thank you to my cousin for letting me shoot his pistol. I fucking hate it. Fair and honest, cuz I hate that shit. I think it's a fucking hunk of garbage, man. But thank you. It gave me some perspective. Yes, it'll shoot a projectile. Great. It'll shoot a projectile that direction. Awesome. It flexes too much for me. I am all about the precise shot. If I want to put a bullet here, I want to put a bullet here. I don't want to put a bullet here when I'm aiming here. I don't want to put a bullet in somebody's nuts when I'm aiming for a forehead. And that happens with that polymer pistol flex flinch. And you see it all the time with people who train with polymer pistols. You'll see them, when they put their pistol out there, they nosedive the pistol. Instead of straight out in front, they nosedive the pistol because they're expecting the recoil and the flex of that pistol. But they're overcompensating, is my point. This was a similar issue for me when I was shooting that pistol. It actually took me one-handing it and, emptying out a full magazine, just bop, 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 full magazine to get the rounds to climb up to figure out where is this thing shooting at. I had to freaking machine gun trigger that thing just to get it to, be able to figure out where the bullets were going. I shouldn't have to do that with a firearm. It should be I point, pull the trigger, and the bullet goes there. If I have to sit there and do 20 rounds to figure out where that gun is putting a bullet, that is an ineffective piece of equipment. That is a waste of ammunition. That is ammunition that could have otherwise been utilized in order to train up good habits, in order to be able to utilize for plinking at, for fun, for going and shooting at, hunting for small game or something, because target loads are also good small game cartridges. Those could have also been used for any of those. But instead, I had to spend 20 rounds to figure out where the fuck that bullet's going. Excuse the fuck out of me, but that's not an effective piece of equipment. That's a paperweight. My black powder guns are way more effective than that. It's cock the hammer, pull the trigger. Literally. And the bullet goes that direction. And it goes that direction with enough potency and enough power to be able to, where that bullet is pointing, or where that barrel is pointing, that bullet is going to go. It's not half a degree up from where that barrel is pointing when I pull the trigger. It's not half a degree up and 4 degrees over. It's there. And that's the point. That's what I'm trying to get to. I cannot stand this BS of, well, polymer pistols are cheaper, so they're better. No, they are cheaper, not better. Metal frame guns are better. Out and out. I will die on that fucking hill. A metal frame gun is better. You don't buy a shotgun with a plastic barrel. You don't buy an AR-15 with a plastic barrel. You don't buy a Glock with a plastic barrel. Why is that? Why does the barrel have to be metal? Because there's polymers that can contain that blast. Oh, that's right, because people need to have it so that you can't go through an one of those electromagnetic metal detector thingies, right? That's why you need the metal in it. No. You need the metal because it compensates for recoil. It takes on energy better. It relates energy better than plastic does. That's why you need metal. This is why there's framework inside of polymer guns nowadays that is metal. It has absolutely nothing to do with being registered on those machines. Because trust me, it doesn't matter what it is, what component. It could be something the size of a thumbtack. And it will show up on those machines. I know, I've tested it. Quite literally a thumbtack in my freaking pocket set off the machine when I didn't have all this, let alone all of this. This is my point. It's a load of horseshit. What you need for a firing pin is enough to set off the machines. So no, playing this game of, well, we need you to have a certain amount of metal in it for the machines to be able to register that you've got a firearm on you. That's bullshit. That is not necessary. The projectiles alone is enough. But more so over than that. It's literally the manufacturers lobbying so that they don't have to give you the real reason. Because the real reason would terrify you from ever utilizing a polymer gun again. Case in point. You don't want to utilize polymer guns if you can help it because of one thing. They flex. And something that flexes when you're discharging a metallic projectile can be dangerous. This is why they put the metal framework in there. Doesn't have to be much in order to reinforce that polymer to make it so it flexes less. And so that flex isn't enough to cause something that you can't compensate for. This is why the original polymer pistols that had no metal in them, people hated them. They fucking hated them. You actually go back and you look at the Glock, I believe it was Gen 3 series, I believe it was the 34. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it was the 34 that was all polymer construction, only had the firing pin that was metal. And the spring and the slide spring. Those were the only things that were metal on this thing. The slide was polymer. The magazine was polymer. All the internals were polymer. All the freaking the frame was polymer. Everything was polymer except for the springs and the firing pin. People fucking hated them. They were constantly getting worn out, broken down, beat up, could not handle a freaking warm charge, and they flexed way too fucking much. When you're holding a gun like this and the barrel goes like that, and your hand did not move, that's enough to make anybody sit back and go, nope, I'm not shooting it again. I've had one in my life that ever did that. So yeah, okay, I understand that's not the case now. Comes back to my point of they were reinforcing them with metal bars after a certain point because they realized that that particular firearm had a problem. You take too much metal out of the frame of it, the chassis, and now that chassis will flex and do all sorts of stuff and just it's unsafe. Doesn't matter that it was more resilient than the steel frames. After a certain amount of rounds, the steel frame will start to crack in certain places. Okay, so you replace the frame. Sure. Polymer frames didn't have that problem. But what they did have a problem with was they flexed so much that people like me who can perceive those microseconds of what a gun is doing in your hand, after that shot that I took and I was sitting there, not the one that slide bit me because that I hadn't realized it yet. You got to remember it's over a period of time that your brain makes up this information. Several rounds downrange, finally I figured out it's flexing in my hand. I'm sitting there pushing, pulling, pressing hard, holding this thing, making sure that my wrist isn't flexing, doing none of that. I'm getting no stovepipes, perfect freaking. It's flexing. All the way out, straight armed. It's flexing in my hand. It's not my hands doing this. It's this. And that gun is flexing. That put me off of polymer guns forever. For me, it has nothing to do with, oh, well, it's a black scary gun. I don't give a fucking flying rat's ass. I like black scary guns. Funny enough, that's a black scary gun. And it's mostly metal. It's an air gun. But it's mostly metal. The plastics on the outside are just black and scary. Would I buy a modern Glock? Maybe. I'm not a fan of them. I don't like Glocks. They still flex too much, for my opinion. It's still too much flex. I don't want to have any flex in a gun. That's why I carry a steel frame revolver. That's why I carried a brass frame revolver forever. I don't like flexing guns. If it flexes, even the slightest, if anything jiggles or moves, I'm really concerned over it. If that jiggle isn't in the barrel, I can live with it. As a for instance, so were you clear? You can see I'm being safe. Thumbs in between the hammer. I do this for a reason. Very little jiggle. Really no room back and forth. No movement of the barrel. Now, in the safety notch, little bit more jiggle. Not really concerned over it because that's not the jiggle I'm worried about. When it's locked up and in battery, is it moving around a lot? That's something to worry about. I've never had anything rattle so much as a Glock in battery. It's one of the most terrifying things in the world, man. You're sitting there with a freaking, what equates to a small hand grenade, and it's jiggling. For the same price as a Glock, I could buy another one of these. Another one of those Remingtons. Now, I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. But my capacity. Right. You got 18 rounds. You might need 10 of them in order to actually put somebody down. I might need 2. Might. So, capacity what? Just saying. Doesn't matter how many fucking rounds you can hold if the ones that you put on target aren't enough to incapacitate. I just heard this argument from another fella here on the YouTubes about incapacitating capability. Now, this is where that stopping power actually comes in. I want to ask y'all something, since y'all are sitting here chunnering with me. Which of these 2 rounds is more incapacitating, do you think? To a man-sized threat. Which of those 2 rounds is more incapacitating? This one's a 25. This one's a 50. They're both hollow points. Which one is more incapacitating? Which one got more knockdown power? I'm just saying. 9mm, gonna need about 10 rounds to make something count. A 50, you're gonna need 1. A 44, you're gonna need 1. Maybe 2. Maybe. And that's a big freaking maybe, especially with cap and ball. And the reason being is the velocity versus the type of metalloid that you are using as the projectile. Copper does not deform like lead does. I hear it all the freaking time. Well, yeah, but I get it to happen in my 30-30. I'm like, great. Your 30-30 is doing what? 2,000, 3,000 feet per second? Now you take that same copper projectile, well, not necessarily the 30 caliber, but you say, a 45 or something, and you put it into a Remington, and you fire it from that Remington. Tell me how that's going to be just as good. It's not. Because of one thing, and that is the overall deformation of the projectile, the amount of energy it can release per period of time in relation to its target point. It's terminal ballistics, basically. In a rifle cartridge, solid copper is going to deform. In a rifle cartridge, jacketed hollow point is going to deform. And it's going to deform really well. In a pistol cartridge, that's not necessarily the case. Jacketed hollow point more so, but still, not quite. It's not quite the same as if it was just a solid lead projectile. Now, I hear you. Oh, well, but at the velocities of things like magnums, those solid lead projectiles start to come apart. Yeah. Okay. What's your point? It goes in like a rifle bullet, comes out like a shotgun blast. It's still more energy into the target. And when I say into, I'm not talking about on target. On target is, nice. Just soaked myself with water. Say I fill this here bucket with water or with concrete, it'd weigh about 200 some odd pounds, right? Now, if I shot this from underneath with my black powder revolver, it's putting out about 200 pounds of impulse. 200 pounds of energy on the target in that relative range. It should be able to lift that particular 1 foot in the air if we're going off of impulse on target, not impulse in the target. This is the difference. This is why a projectile does not do what you think it does. Most of the time when they're measuring foot-pound impulse, when we're talking foot-pounds of impulse, they did that with a device which had a 1 pound piece of steel on a pendulum. And that pendulum on the other side had a pointer. And that pointer read on a gauge. And it was one guy's job to sit down there next to the damn target and read the number off of the pointer on the gauge while the other guy's sitting there shooting the piece of steel and knocking that pointer over. And each foot-pound on that relates to a certain amount of degrees. It doesn't do what you think it does. 1 foot-pound is not necessarily what's going to drive something 1 foot. Okay? It's what pushed 1 pound. Okay? 1 pound of steel. A degree which translated to feet of distance that particular 1 pound of steel would have traveled horizontally without any resistance. It's a mathematical figure, not something that you're going to sit there and see in general physics without a vacuum and deep space. Okay? So foot-pounds are actually much smaller than you think. This is a 243 grain I take that back. It's 250 grain projectile. This is a 50 caliber. This is a 250 grain projectile. Moving at about 785 feet per second. This has about 500 foot-pounds of energy. Roughly speaking. Again, air gun figures. Long time in the past, I just memorized them all. Okay. That 500 foot-pounds of energy is enough to push this little 250 grain projectile to the opposite shoulder of a wild pig, have it bounce off of that opposite shoulder of the wild pig, and then come back and stick next to the ribs on the other side. And I know this because I've done it. But, again, that 500 foot-pounds of energy versus that 500-pound pig did not knock that 500-pound pig over or cause it to tumble a foot. It punched a hole through it. Do you see the difference here? And I hear you say, oh, well, it's because it's soft, fleshy material. What if you hit a piece of steel that was 500 pounds? It wouldn't move it a foot. It might move it about a half a foot because of other interfering things. It might only move it an inch depending on what the resistance level is, what the friction on it is. So again, You're never going to get a perfect measurement of foot-pounds by actual motor movement. It's through a mathematical relation. It tells you how much energy is in this piece of a material while it's moving at that speed. That is just kinetic energy. This has a lot of potential energy, but I can't convert it to potential energy without moving it very fast. So, as for the argument for black powder over, say, modern firearms, are modern firearms more reliable than black powder guns? Yes and no. Yes and no. Have I had misfires with black powder guns? Yeah. Have I had misfires with modern firearms? Yes. Both. Have I ever had a misfire with an air gun? No. If there's a projectile in the barrel and I pull the trigger and there is pressure in the system, that projectile is going to fly down range, regardless of whether the fuck or not a primer went off or the powder burned. As long as there is air pressure and a projectile in the barrel, when I pull this little doohickey switch right here, that projectile is going to get pushed down this barrel. Not because I'm relying on a chemical reaction, but because I'm relying on pure physics. Undo my spare because it's easier to get to as far as for the video here. Well, I thought it was easier. All right. So, an air gun is relying off of pure physics. There's no chemistry involved. Every firearm, black powder, modern firearm, does not matter. Every firearm relies on chemistry as well as physics. Something has to make this chemically decompose. That's your cap. In order to fly one of them projectiles downrange. That's how that works. You have to get your gas pressure from somewhere. With an air gun, it is entirely contained within the system. There is no exchange, no change of material. It is entirely in the system. It's all physics. This is not all physics. This has chemistry involved. And while as much as I like to say, it's because of physicists that we have chemistry and it's because of chemists that we have awesome physics, they're not the same thing. So, when it comes down to it, modern revolvers, modern firearms, what it really is a status symbol. You have something that fires from a cartridge. You can shoot more rounds more often with less time reloading. Awesome. So, in the grand scheme of shit, really, it's just a status symbol. It's just something that, especially since, well, at least before the NFA was kind of neutered, thank heaven. Still waiting for the GCA to be neutered, by the way. But those spare taxes that the government taxes you for to register your firearms, which is the law, by the way, you have to register your firearm. You have to register the tax. So you are, in effect, registering the firearm. And a firearm registration is the first step towards a list of firearms owners, which is the first step towards confiscation. But I digress. If you are a real American, when I say a real American, I'm not talking about, I go and I eat Dodger dogs on the weekends with my buddies and go watch a Dodger game and, have beers and fly the American flag because I think it's cool. You were born in this country. You were raised to be honest and logical. You recognize the importance of these different things that were set down 200 years before you were born. You're an American first. Then you're a Kentuckian or a Tennessean or a Texian or a Californian or an Oregonian, But you're an American first. You're not an American third. You're not an American because, I think, America is cool and so one day I'm going to move there. You're an American because you were born here, because your parents fucking fought for this country, because your great-grandparents fought for this country, and they fucking put in the hard work. The Second Amendment is non-fucking negotiable. I'm sorry. No. I will not buy your guns while they are still regulated by the government. I don't give a flying fuck which government. I don't care. And it has nothing to do with illegality, this or that. It has to do with unlawful. When the government oversteps their boundaries and creates unlawful legislation, it is the people's duty to throw off that legislation, ergo, that government. Or do you not learn your history, people? There's a reason why these words were written. There's a reason why our nation is built on them. It doesn't matter whether it's a king or a legislature. Your rights are easily destroyed unless you fight for them. Unless you're willing to put your dick on the chopping block and say, swing, batta, good luck. Because if you miss, I'm going to blow your fucking knees off. It literally has to take that amount of fucking fortitude, man. And I don't see it. I see people going and saying, I just have to go and pay this extra toll and this fee and that and do this and the other and jump through all these hoops. It's no big deal. It's all to keep us safe. To quote Benjamin Franklin, those who trade their freedom and liberty for safety and security deserve neither. So, what is the argument for black powder guns? It's very simple. It is the only way that you can go and stand to your Second Amendment lawfully and still own a firearm. Now, do you understand why it pisses me off so much?